Sign the damn paper, Harlan. You owe this family your miserable life, and your little dirt-poor wife is going to shut her mouth while you do it. That was my father, screaming over the roar of my forge, slamming a thick contract onto my workbench. He wanted me to sign away my custom metal fabrication shop, my entire life's work, to bail out my Golden Boy Brothers' $50 million hedge fund disaster. The sheer audacity made my blood boil. How did a guy who works with his hands end up holding the fate of a Wall Street empire? It started with years of endless disrespect. If they thought I was going to roll over and let them take everything I built to save a brother who treated me like garbage, they were entirely wrong. But to understand how we got to this breaking point, you need to see exactly what kind of people they are. The heat in my workshop was sweltering, radiating from the glowing steel I was shaping on the anvil. The air was thick with the sharp tang of burning coal and hot iron. It was my sanctuary, but that peace was shattered the moment the heavy metal doors banged open. My father, Orson, stormed in first. He was a man who usually wore his authority like a tailored suit, but today he looked unraveled. His face was flushed red, and a thick sheen of sweat coated his forehead. Following close behind was my mother, Beatrix, her hands trembling so violently that her knuckles were bone-white as she clutched her expensive leather purse. Then came Declan, my older brother, the financial genius, the pride and joy of the family. He looked like a walking ghost. His custom-tailored designer suit, usually crisp and immaculate, was wrinkled and stained. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes darted around my shop with a mix of pure desperation and deep disgust. Bringing up the rear was a sleazy-looking guy in a cheap suit holding a briefcase. A lawyer, obviously. They looked entirely out of place amidst the heavy machinery, the scattered metal shavings, and the towering racks of raw steel. I stood there, wiping grime from my forehead with the back of my thick leather glove, wearing a soot-stained apron. The contrast could not have been starker. Orson did not waste time with greetings. He marched right up to my primary workbench and slammed a manila folder down on the scarred wood. The sound cracked like a whip over the hum of the ventilation fans. "We are out of time, Harlan," he barked, though his voice wavered with an edge of panic I had never heard before. "You need to sign this right now. We have a buyer lined up. The funds will cover Declan's immediate legal liabilities and keep him out of prison." I stared at the folder. I knew exactly what it was without even opening it. They wanted to liquidate my land, the only place where I had ever built something of my own. "I am not signing anything, Dad," I said, my voice low and steady. "You do not have a choice," Orson roared, slamming his fist on the table. "Declan made a mistake, a big one, but he is your brother. Family protects family. You have a duty to fix this." A duty. The word hung in the dusty air, heavy and toxic. My entire existence had been measured against Declan's success, and I had always come up short in their eyes. Now, the Golden Boy had crashed his $50 million empire into the ground, and I was expected to sacrifice my livelihood to cushion his fall. Looking at the contract that priced my sweat and tears at a bargain rate, a dark rage simmered in my chest. I reached out, fully intending to rip the document in half and throw it into the glowing forge. But before my fingers even grazed the paper, a voice cut through the tension. "I am afraid you are trying to sell something that does not belong to you." Genevieve, my wife, stepped out from the heavy steel door that led to her basement laboratory. She wiped a smudge of oil from her cheek, looking calmly at my furious father. She glanced at the contract, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. They did not know it yet, but that single sentence was the spark that would burn their false empire to the ground. What were they going to do when they realized who actually held the deed? To understand why Genevieve's words were so sweet, you have to understand the nightmare I grew up in. I was the classic invisible child. While Declan was winning math bowls and getting groomed for Ivy League greatness, I was out in the garage, taking apart engines and teaching myself how to weld. To my parents, Declan was an investment. I was a liability. I remember the day I decided to open my own custom fabrication shop. I was 22, driven, and ready to work myself to the bone. I drew up a solid business plan and sat down with Orson, asking him to co-sign a modest small business loan. I did not ask for a handout, just a signature. Orson looked at my blueprints, laughed in my face, and tossed them back across his mahogany desk. I am not putting my name on a glorified blacksmith shop, Harlan. Get a real degree or get a job at a factory. The very next day, he bought Declan a brand new Porsche to celebrate his promotion to junior analyst. I swallowed the bitter pill, worked 3 jobs, saved every penny, and built my shop from the dirt up. But the real disrespect, the kind that leaves a permanent scar, was reserved for my wife. Genevieve and I met when she needed a custom steel casing for some equipment she was building. She was brilliant, down to earth, and entirely unimpressed by shiny things. She spent most of her time in coveralls and steel-toed boots, lost in her research. My family hated her immediately. Our wedding was held right here, on the grass outside the forge. We wanted a simple barbecue, good music, and real friends. We did not want a stuffy country club affair. Declan was my best man, mostly because Orson forced the issue to keep up appearances. When it was time for speeches, Declan stood up, tapping his champagne glass. He looked at me, then at Genevieve, and smirked. "To my little brother, Harlan," Declan began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I have to say, I am relieved he finally found someone. I always thought he would end up marrying an anvil." Polite, awkward laughter rippled through the family tables. But then he brought Genevieve home, and it all made sense. My brother loves playing in the dirt, and his lovely new bride, well, she is a penniless country girl who just plays in the dirt too. He actually used those words, penniless country girl. He gestured to his own wife, Vesper, who was sitting there dripping in diamonds and glaring at her phone. Some of us are lucky enough to marry elite goddesses who understand the finer things in life. And some of us find our match in the mud. To the happy couple, may you always have enough scrap metal to keep a roof over your heads. I saw the flash of hurt in Genevieve's eyes before she quickly masked it with a smile. I gripped the edge of the table so hard the wood splintered. I wanted to drag him across the grass and beat the arrogance out of him. But Genevieve put her hand on my knee and squeezed. She did not want me to ruin our day. I swallowed the rage, pushing it down deep. I told myself that staying silent and ignoring them was the mature thing to do. I believed that if we just lived our lives and stayed out of their way, it would be fine. But I was wrong. 3 years later, Declan proved that he did not just want to look down on me from his penthouse. He wanted to actively stomp us into the ground. And he did it by taking a sledgehammer to my livelihood. How much more could a man take before he strikes back? Fast forward to a year ago, my shop was finally gaining some serious traction. I had spent months designing and pitching a massive set of custom architectural bronze gates for a luxury estate development on the edge of the city. It was the kind of contract that would put my name on the map and bring in enough money to upgrade all my aging equipment. The developer loved my designs. We shook hands on a verbal agreement, and the paperwork was supposed to be drawn up by Friday. Friday came and went. Then Monday, when I finally got the developer on the phone, his tone was entirely different. Cold, distant. He told me they had decided to go in a different direction and awarded the contract to a massive industrial manufacturer. I was crushed, but a few weeks later the truth slipped out. My parents hosted a lavish dinner party to celebrate Declan's hedge fund crossing the $50 million mark in managed assets. Genevieve and I were summoned, mostly to serve as the baseline of failure so Declan's success would shine brighter. We walked into the dining room, and Vesper immediately started in on Genevieve. Vesper was a woman whose entire personality was built on labels and price tags. She looked Genevieve up and down, sneering at her simple, hand-sewn dress. "Oh, Genevieve, honey," Vesper drawled loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Is that dress a vintage find? Or did you just stitch some old curtains together? I swear, Harlan, you need to work harder so your wife does not look like such a charity case." Genevieve just smiled pleasantly and said, "It is comfortable, Vesper. That is all that matters." Later that evening, after a few glasses of scotch, Declan pulled me aside in the study. He was glowing with smug satisfaction. "Tough break on those bronze gates, little bro. he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I froze. I had not told anyone in the family about that contract. How do you know about that? Declan chuckled. The developer is one of the primary investors in my fund. We were playing golf last week. He mentioned he was hiring some local nobody to pound out some gates for his new project. I asked for the name. When he said it was you, I advised him against it. Told him you lacked the capacity and that he should use a real firm. I introduced him to the CEO of a major manufacturing plant. Also one of my clients. Kept the money in the family, so to speak. My vision actually blurred. He had stolen my biggest contract just to secure a favor for his own fund. He had reached into my pocket and set my business back a year, all while smiling in my face. You sabotaged me. I hissed, my fists clenching. Declan just shrugged, looking utterly bored. Business is business, little bro. I am playing in the big leagues. You are just a hammer swinger in a dirty apron. Do not dream too big, and you will not get hurt. If you were in my shoes, would you have punched him right there? Let me know down in the comments, because honestly, it took every ounce of self-control I had to keep from breaking his jaw. I grabbed Genevieve's hand and we walked out of that house without looking back. We cut contact after that night. We retreated to the forge, focusing on our work, building our life away from their toxic poison. We thought we were finally free of them, but then my phone rang. It was Aunt Theodora, and the hysterical panic in her voice told me that Declan's golden facade was finally cracking. Just how bad could it be? Aunt Theodora was the family's dedicated flying monkey. She lived for drama and thrived on delivering Orson and Beatrix's guilt trips whenever they felt I was straying too far from their control. When I answered the phone, I expected a lecture about missing a holiday dinner. Instead, I got shrieks. "Harlan, you ungrateful, selfish boy," she sobbed into the receiver. "How can you just sit out there in the woods while your brother is going through hell? Your family is falling apart, and you do not even care. What are you talking about, Theodora?" I asked, wiping grease off my hands. "Declan, he is in trouble. Everything is gone. You need to call your father immediately." She hung up before I could ask anything else. I stared at the phone. Everything is gone. That did not make sense. The guy managed $50 million. But my confusion did not last long. Less than an hour later, I got a text from Silas. Silas was Declan's former personal assistant, a sharp kid who actually liked me. Declan had fired him a month ago for pointing out a flaw in a risk assessment report. The text simply read, "Meet me at Callahan's scrapyard." Now, it is about Declan. Callahan was a good buddy of mine, a guy who supplied me with high-grade reclaimed metals. When I pulled into the muddy lot, Silas was pacing nervously between two stacks of crushed cars. "Thanks for coming," Silas said, constantly looking over his shoulder. "Listen, it has not hit the papers yet, but the SEC is swarming Declan's office. The fund is vaporized, Harlan. All of it. Vaporized? How do you lose $50 million overnight?" I asked in shock. "Pride and a massive, reckless short position," Silas explained, his voice hushed. He found this green metallurgy tech startup that was gaining traction. Declan thought their patents were garbage and the CEO was a fraud. He borrowed heavily on margin and shorted their stock into the dirt, betting they would fail. But yesterday, the startup secured a massive government grant and unveiled a new indestructible alloy. Their stock price exploded by 500%. Declan got margin called. He could not cover it. The fund is wiped out, and his clients are out for blood. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The arrogance. He had gambled with other people's money to destroy a company, and it blew up in his face. But Silas was not done. He grabbed my arm, his eyes wide. "There is something else, Harlan." Before he got fired, I saw the personal transfers. When the margin calls started, Declan panicked. He went to your parents. Orson and Beatrix secretly remortgaged their house and gave Declan their entire retirement savings to try and stop the bleeding. The breath left my lungs. "They gave him everything?" "Everything," Silas confirmed. "And it is all gone. The feds are looking at Declan for fraud. Your parents are broke. And Harlan, they are coming for you. I heard Orson screaming on the phone this morning. He said you have an asset, the land. Before I could even process the horror of what Silas was saying, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Orson. I answered it, putting it to my ear. Get home right now, Orson commanded. His voice was not the booming roar of a confident patriarch. It was the raspy, terrifying hiss of a drowning man trying to pull someone else under. You owe this family your life. It is time to pay your debts. He hung up. The trap was set. But what they did not realize was that I was not the prey anymore. I was walking into the lion's den. But what would happen when the lion realized it was toothless? Genevieve and I pulled into the sweeping driveway of my parents' house. The sprawling estate looked exactly the same, but the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no valet, no caterers. The air itself felt heavy, suffocating under the weight of sheer desperation. When we walked through the front doors, the silence was broken by the sound of glass shattering. We found them in the formal dining room. Vesper was pacing like a caged animal, screaming at the top of her lungs, mascara running down her cheeks. You promised me security, Vesper shrieked, throwing a crystal tumbler against the wall. My cards are declined. The country club called me this morning to say our membership is suspended. I am filing for divorce, Declan. You ruined my life. Declan did not even flinch. He sat at the head of the table, staring blankly at the polished mahogany. He looked like a corpse. His skin was gray, and his hands trembled as they rested in his lap. Beatrix sat next to him, weeping silently into a silk handkerchief, looking 20 years older than she had a week ago. Orson stood by the fireplace. When he saw me, his eyes locked onto me like a heat-seeking missile. Sit down, Orson ordered, pointing to a chair. I prefer to stand, I said, crossing my arms. Genevieve stood quietly beside me, her expression unreadable. Fine. Let us skip the pleasantries, Orson snapped. He walked over and slapped a piece of paper on the table. It was a property valuation. Declan is facing multiple lawsuits and potential criminal charges. His clients want their money. The lawyers want retainers. We have tapped out our liquidity. The only unencumbered asset left in this family is the land your shop sits on. We have an aggressive buyer. You will sign the deed over to Declan's holding company tonight, so we can finalize the sale tomorrow. He said it so casually. He was demanding I slaughter my own livelihood to feed his favorite son's catastrophic failure. No, I said flatly. Orson blinked, as if I had spoken a foreign language. Excuse me? I said no. I am not selling my shop. I am not bailing him out. I repeated, my voice echoing in the large room. Beatrix let out a wail. Harlan, how can you be so cruel? Your brother could go to jail. We could lose this house. Have you no heart? You mortgaged this house in secret to feed his ego. I shot back. You made your bed. I am not burning my house down to keep you warm. Orson's face turned a violent shade of purple. He marched toward me, stopping inches from my face. You ungrateful little bastard. I gave you life. I put a roof over your head. You are nothing but a grease monkey. Your shop is a hobby. Declan built an empire. An empire of debt and fraud. I countered, not backing down. It is her, is it not? Orson snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Genevieve. This little dirt-poor tramp has poisoned you against your own blood. She is nothing. She comes from nothing, and she will drag you down with her. If you walk out that door, you are dead to me. You are written out of the will. You are disowned. The threat of being written out of a will that now held $0 was almost comical. But the insult to my wife snapped the last thread of restraint I possessed. I reached out, grabbed the edge of the heavy mahogany dining table, and flipped it violently. Dishes, silverware, and crystal shattered across the hardwood floor. Beatrix screamed. Declan jolted backward. Keep her name out of your mouth, I growled, pointing at Orson. We are done here. Do not ever contact us again. I grabbed Genevieve's hand and pulled her out of the house. We got into my truck in silence. As I drove away from the wreckage of my family, the adrenaline faded, leaving a heavy knot of guilt in my stomach. I had dragged Genevieve into this nightmare. I glanced at her, expecting to see fear or sadness, but her eyes were not fearful. They were burning with a quiet, lethal intensity. She turned to look at me, a calm smile on her face. They want to take everything from you to save a sinking ship. I think it is time for you to see what I really do down in that basement, Harlan. What exactly was my quiet, unassuming wife hiding under my forge? The drive back to our property was wrapped in a thick, contemplative silence. My mind was reeling from the confrontation, the sheer entitlement of my father, and the catastrophic collapse of Declan's fund. But mostly, my mind was focused on Genevieve's cryptic words. When we got home, we bypassed the house entirely. Genevieve led me straight into the workshop. We walked past the silent anvils and the cooling forge, toward the heavy steel door in the back corner. It was a space she used as her laboratory. I had never really asked too many questions about it. I knew she was a material scientist, and I knew she ran some sort of consulting business. I always respected her privacy, just as she respected my creative process with the metal. She unlocked the door, flipped a switch, and fluorescent lights flickered to life. The basement was spotless, lined with high-tech spectrometers, chemical testing stations, and racks of metal alloy samples. Genevieve walked over to a sleek metal desk and woke up her computer monitors. They flared with complex charts, molecular structures, and financial dashboards. "Sit," she told me, pulling up a chair. I sat down, feeling entirely out of my depth. "Ellie, what is all this?" She took a deep breath. "You know how Declan always called me a country girl playing in the dirt?" "Yeah." I scowled, the memory still fresh and bitter. Well, he was partly right. I do play with dirt. Specifically, rare earth minerals and advanced polymers. She tapped a few keys, bringing up a corporate logo on the main screen. A sleek, silver shield with a green core. 2 years ago, I patented a new smelting process that bonds recycled steel with a proprietary green polymer. It creates an alloy that is lighter than aluminum but stronger than military-grade titanium, and it is entirely carbon negative. I stared at her, trying to process the magnitude of what she was saying. "You invented a new metal?" "I did," she nodded. "And I secured major venture capital backing to bring it to market. I am the CEO and majority shareholder of Aegis Core." I recognized the name. It had been all over the tech news blogs I casually scrolled through while eating lunch. Aegis Core. They were the next big thing in sustainable infrastructure. "Genevieve?" I breathed, my heart pounding. "What is your company valued at?" She looked me dead in the eye. "As of our Series B funding round last month, Aegis Core is valued at $100 million. My jaw practically hit the floor. 100 million. My wife, the woman who patched her own jeans and packed my lunch every morning, was running a $100 million tech empire out of my basement. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, not angry, just profoundly stunned. "Because I wanted us to have a normal life," she said softly, taking my hands. "I saw what chasing wealth did to your brother. Turned him into a monster. It turned your parents into enablers. I wanted to build this quietly, let it grow without the poison of greed ruining what we have. I wanted you to love me for me, not for a corporate valuation." "I do love you for you," I said, pulling her close. "I would love you if you had 50 cents to your name. But Ellie, this is incredible." She pulled back slightly, her expression hardening. "There is more, Harlan. And this is the part that is going to blow your mind." She turned back to the computer and pulled up a legal document. "When we got the series of funding 2 years ago, I needed a physical headquarters on paper for zoning and tax purposes. We talked about asset protection, remember? I asked you to sign some paperwork transferring the deed of this land." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, you said it was to put the land in a trust so if my business ever went under, we would not lose the house." "It was not a trust," Genevieve said, a fierce smile breaking across her face. "You transferred the land to Aegis Core LLC in exchange for a 20% equity stake in the company. Legally, you do not own this land anymore, Harlan. Aegis Corps does. Corporation. Your father cannot force you to sell it because you have no legal authority to sell it. A wave of immense relief washed over me, followed immediately by a sharp spike of realization. My mind raced back to what Silas had told me at the scrapyard. Declan had shorted a green metallurgy tech startup. He bet his entire $50 million fund that the company would fail, and he got wiped out when they secured a government grant. I looked at the screens, then at Genevieve. My voice was a hoarse whisper. Ellie, the startup that Declan shorted, the one that vaporized his fund. Genevieve's smile turned razor-sharp, a look of pure, unadulterated justice. Yes, Declan bet $50 million against Aegis Corps. He bet against me, and I broke him. The poetic justice of it was staggering. Declan, the arrogant Wall Street titan, had literally destroyed his own life trying to bankrupt the very woman he relentlessly mocked. They are going to come here, I said, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across my face. They are going to bring their lawyers and try to force me to sign that land over. I know, Genevieve said, crossing her arms. And we are going to let them. The trap was set. But this time we were the ones holding the cage. All we had to do was wait for them to walk right in. The next morning, the air in the forge was entirely different. The suffocating dread that usually accompanied any interaction with my family was gone, replaced by a cold, sharpened focus. I was not a victim waiting for the axe to fall. I was the one holding the hammer. Callahan had come over early, bringing a truckload of premium high-carbon steel billets. We were working on a personal project, something to keep my hands busy and my mind razor-sharp while we waited for the inevitable invasion. We were forging a custom broadsword. It was an intricate, demanding piece of metalwork that required intense concentration. The rhythmic clanging of our hammers against the glowing steel felt like a countdown. Every strike was a deliberate act of shaping raw, stubborn material into something focused and undeniable. Felt symbolic. I was finally cutting the toxic ties that had bound me for 32 years. Around 10 in the morning, a sleek black sedan crunched up the gravel driveway. It was not my family. A woman stepped out, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. Her posture was straight, her gaze observant and piercing. This was Rosalind. She was the chief auditor and legal representative for the venture capital firm that had just poured a massive round of funding into Aegis Corps. Genevieve walked out of the house to greet her, looking relaxed in her usual denim overalls and steel-toed boots. The visual contrast between my wife, the supposed dirt-poor country girl, and the high-powered corporate titan shaking her hand with profound respect, was something Orson and Declan could never have comprehended. "Good morning, Genevieve," Rosalind said, her voice smooth and professional. "I brought the final ratification documents for the land trust integration." "Perfect timing," Genevieve smiled, leading her into the workshop. "Harlan, this is Rosalind. Rosalind, my husband and the master of this domain." I set my hammer down and wiped my soot-stained hand on a rag before offering it to her. Rosalind shook it firmly, looking around the towering racks of metal, the roaring forge, and the scattered tools with genuine appreciation. "This is an impressive operation you have built here, Harlan," Rosalind noted, pulling out a stack of documents and a gold pen. "Genevieve speaks very highly of your craftsmanship. The board is actually hoping to commission you for the architectural installations at our new corporate headquarters next spring." "It would be an honor," I replied, feeling a surge of genuine pride. For years, my own blood had treated my work as a dirty joke. Here was one of the most powerful women in corporate finance treating my shop with undeniable respect. Genevieve poured Rosalind a cup of herbal tea from a thermos, and the three of us stood around a clean corner of the workbench, reviewing the paperwork. The atmosphere was calm, professional, and entirely grounded. We were discussing zoning laws, equity stakes, and industrial expansion. It was a glimpse into the real empire we had built, one based on mutual respect and actual hard work. But outside, the storm was gathering. The silence of the morning was abruptly shattered by the aggressive roar of an engine. I looked through the dusty window and saw Orson's luxury SUV tearing down the driveway, followed closely by a cheap sedan. "They are here," I said, my voice dropping to a low rumble. Genevieve calmly signed the last page of the document and handed the pen back to Rosalind. She took a slow sip of her tea. "Let them come." Rosalind neatly packed the papers back into her briefcase, leaning against the workbench with a look of mild curiosity. She knew exactly what was about to happen. Genevieve had briefed her on the situation regarding my family and the impending attempt at land theft. Rosalind simply crossed her legs, holding her teacup, and waited for the show to begin. The heavy metal doors of the workshop did not just open. They were kicked inward. Orson marched in, his face a mask of furious entitlement, bringing the chaos of their ruined lives directly into my sanctuary. They were here to take my kingdom, entirely unaware that they were stepping straight into an active volcano. This brings us right back to the moment I described at the very beginning of this story. The air crackled with hostility. Orson led the charge, with Beatrix crying into a tissue, Declan looking like a hollow shell of a man, and the sleazy lawyer clutching his briefcase like a shield. They stomped past the racks of steel, ignoring the heat of the forge, marching straight toward the center of the shop. They did not even notice Rosalind standing quietly in the shadows near the back wall. Their eyes were locked on me, seeing only a stubborn obstacle they needed to bulldoze. Orson slammed the manila folder onto my workbench. "We are done talking, Harlan. Sign the papers." The lawyer stepped forward, puffing out his chest to look intimidating. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a silver pen. "Mr. Harlan, I am representing your brother's estate. We have a purchase and sale agreement right here. A commercial developer is eager to acquire this parcel of land. The funds will be transferred directly to an escrow account to handle your brother's immediate legal obligations. It is a clean solution to a messy problem. I strongly advise you to sign." "It is not a solution," I said, my voice steady, staring dead into Orson's eyes. "It is theft. And I already told you no." Orson's face contorted with rage. "You selfish little fool. After everything we have done for you, I put clothes on your back. I fed you. This piece of dirt is nothing but a cheap scrapyard. You can move your little metal-banging hobby to a rented garage in the slums for all I care. Your brother's freedom is on the line." I did not say a word. I turned around, picked up a grinding wheel, and began polishing a piece of raw iron. The screeching sound of metal on stone filled the room, forcing Orson to shout over the noise. It was the ultimate power move. Let them scream. Let them expose their true, ugly nature. I was not going to play their game anymore. "Do not ignore me," Orson bellowed, his face turning purple. "Declan built a $50 million fund. He is a titan. You are just a grease monkey. You owe him this. You owe this family." Declan finally spoke, his voice trembling with a pathetic mix of arrogance and terror. "Just sign it, Harlan. Do not be an idiot. You do not understand how much trouble I am in. The feds are outside my office. My clients are filing injunctions. I need this capital today or I am going to federal prison. Stop playing the victim and do your job as a brother." Even in his darkest hour, begging for his salvation, he still looked down on me. He still thought he was superior. "This is not about your feelings," Orson added, slamming his fist on the table again. "This is about the family name. Think of his children. Think of the legacy." "He should have thought of that before he gambled with other people's money," I replied, turning off the grinder. The sudden silence in the shop was deafening. "This is his mess. He can clean it up. I am not setting myself on fire to keep you warm." Beatrix stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. She reached out to grab my apron. "Please, Harlan. I am begging you. It is just a piece of dirt with a shed on it. What you do is a hobby. This is his life, his career. Please, just sign the paper." A hobby. After all these years, all the blood, sweat, and burns, that was all my life meant to them. A disposable hobby. The lawyer cleared his throat, looking impatient. "If you refuse to sign voluntarily, We will be forced to take this to a judge and tie this property up in litigation for years. You will lose it anyway in legal fees. Sign it now and we can all walk away." The lawyer extended the pen toward my face. I looked at it, then looked at Declan. Before anyone could take another breath, the sharp, authoritative click of Rosalind's heels echoed across the concrete floor. She stepped out of the shadows, placing her teacup gently onto a steel barrel. Genevieve stepped up right beside her, wiping her hands on a rag, her eyes locked on the lawyer. "I think there has been a major misunderstanding here," Genevieve said, her voice crystal clear and cutting through the tension like a blade. The final act had begun. Orson whipped his head around, glaring at Genevieve. "Keep your mouth shut, you little country brat. This is family business. It has nothing to do with you." Genevieve did not flinch. She walked slowly toward the workbench, placing her hands flat on the scarred wood. She looked down at the contract, then back up at Orson. "Actually, Orson, it has everything to do with me," Genevieve said calmly. "This folder is entirely useless. The premise of your entire grand plan is fundamentally flawed." The lawyer scoffed, adjusting his cheap tie. "And who are you supposed to be? We have pulled the county records. The deed to this parcel was transferred to Harlan 5 years ago. Key word being was," Genevieve corrected him smoothly. "You see, you have made a very common mistake. You judged a book by its cover. You looked at us and saw a simple metalworker and his quiet wife. You assumed we were poor, powerless, and easy to intimidate into giving up our assets." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the hot air of the forge. "You are wrong on all counts. I am sure you consider yourself a competent attorney, so you must understand the basics of corporate property law. You cannot sell what you do not own. And Harlan does not own this land. Not anymore." A confused, heavy silence fell over the room. The lawyer frowned, flipping frantically through his file. "What is this nonsense? If he does not own it, who does?" 2 years ago, Genevieve explained, her voice ringing with authority. "As part of the initial capitalization of my company, Harlan transferred this property to Aegis Core LLC as a capital asset in exchange for a 20% equity stake. I am the founder, CEO, and majority shareholder of that company. Therefore, legally, I control this land. And I can assure you, I am not selling it to cover the gambling debts of a failed hedge fund manager." The color drained rapidly from Orson's face. He looked at me, then at Genevieve, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The lawyer's jaw went slack. He squinted at Genevieve, then looked past her, finally noticing Rosalind standing nearby. His eyes widened in pure horror as recognition set in. "Wait," the lawyer stammered, pointing a shaking finger. "Are you Rosalind Sterling? From Sterling and Vance Corporate Trust?" Rosalind smiled a tight, predatory smile. "I am, and I can verify everything Dr. Genevieve just told you. The deed is secured under Aegis Core's corporate umbrella. This contract you brought is not worth the paper it is printed on. Furthermore, attempting to coerce a shareholder into liquidating a corporate asset under duress is a severe violation. If you do not leave this property in the next 60 seconds, I will personally see to it that you are disbarred by Friday." The lawyer practically swallowed his own tongue. He snatched the manila folder off the table, shoved it into his briefcase, and backed away toward the door. "I was not informed of this. I have no part in this. Good day." He sprinted out of the workshop, leaving my family entirely defenseless. Declan, however, refused to believe it. His ego simply could not process the reality of the situation. He let out a harsh, manic laugh. "You are lying," Declan spat, pointing at Genevieve. "This is a bluff. Pathetic bluff. You do not own a company. You are a dirt-poor country girl who patches her own clothes. A company? What, do you sell homemade soap on the internet? You expect me to believe a penniless nobody like you runs a corporation that owns prime real estate?" Genevieve smiled, a smile so sharp it could cut glass. "I do not expect you to believe anything, Declan. I just expect you to pay the margin call on your short position." Declan froze. The manic laughter died in his throat. "I am not lying to you, Declan," Genevieve said softly. But then again, your clients are the ones who got lied to, are they not? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Declan's eyes darted frantically around the shop, searching for an escape from the reality that was rapidly crashing down on his head. What are you talking about? Declan whispered, his voice cracking. Genevieve stepped closer to him. That brings me to the second and profoundly more ironic part of this little misunderstanding. You see, Declan, my legal team did some digging when we heard your fund collapsed. They were very interested to learn the exact mechanism of your failure. She crossed her arms, staring him down like a predator cornering its prey. A cornerstone of your brilliant investment strategy is to bet against companies you believe will fail. You look for what you perceive as weakness, you borrow heavily, and you try to profit from their collapse. It is the ultimate act of arrogance. You think you are smarter than everyone else. Declan started to sweat profusely. I do not know what you are talking about. The market was manipulated. It was an anomaly. Oh, it was no anomaly, Genevieve countered. The single largest, most catastrophic loss in your portfolio, the one that triggered the margin calls and wiped out $50 million of your client's money, was a massive, highly leveraged short position against an emerging green metallurgy tech company. You were utterly convinced they were all hype. You thought their patents were garbage. She let the silence stretch for a painful, agonizing beat. You bet $30 million on the failure of Aegis Core. My company. The words echoed off the metal walls of the shop. You tried to profit from destroying my life's work, Genevieve continued, her voice turning to ice. You looked at my technology and decided it was worthless, just like you decided I was worthless. But yesterday, Aegis Core secured a massive federal grant, and our stock soared 500%. You tried to bury me, Declan, and in doing so, you handed my company $30 million and dug your own grave. The confession was written in vivid detail all over Declan's ashen face. His knees buckled. He stumbled backward, his shoulders slamming into a heavy steel anvil. He gripped the edges of it, gasping for air as if he had just been punched in the chest. He had, in his endless arrogance and blinding prejudice, become the sole author of his own destruction. Orson looked at Declan, then at Genevieve, his mind struggling to process the sheer poetic justice of the situation. His golden boy, the financial genius, had bankrupted himself trying to destroy the woman he had relentlessly mocked for years. But the final, most devastating blow had not landed yet. Beatrix, who had been listening in stunned silence, suddenly let out a sound that was less of a cry and more of a dying gasp. She stared at Declan, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. Declan? Beatrix whimpered, her voice shaking violently. The $30 million. The money you used to bet against her. Where did you get the extra capital when the fund started dipping? Declan could not look at her. He stared at the sawdust on the floor, tears streaming down his face. Beatrix fell to her knees. Our house, the retirement accounts. Orson, he took our money. He put our entire life savings into that bet. She collapsed onto the dirt floor, sobbing hysterically. The truth was finally out in the open. The money my parents had saved for 30 years, the equity in the mansion they loved so much, was gone. It had been swallowed whole by Declan's ego and fed directly into the valuation of Genevieve's empire. Thank you for sticking with me this far. If you are enjoying this story of justice, drop a W in the comments. That stands for win. For those of you who have made it this far, and I will be hearting and replying to every single comment with that keyword. The scene inside my workshop was a portrait of total devastation. The false empire they had built on arrogance, favoritism, and cruelty had crumbled into dust right before my eyes. Beatrix crawled across the dirty floor, her expensive silk pants ruined by the soot and grime. She grabbed the leg of my jeans, looking up at me with a face twisted in pure agony. Harlan, please, she sobbed, her voice raw and broken. You have to help us. If her company has all this money, if she is worth $100 million, you can give it back. Just give us back the money for the house. We will be on the street, Harlan. We are your parents. You cannot let us become homeless. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like an embarrassing afterthought. When I had needed a tiny loan to start my business, they had laughed in my face. When they thought I had an asset they could steal to save their golden boy, they had stormed in here demanding I sacrifice my life's work. I gently but firmly reached down and peeled her hands off my leg. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it held the weight of an iron anvil. "This was never about money, Mom," I said, looking from her to Orson. "This was about respect, and you have shown us none. You came into my home today not to ask for help, but to demand a sacrifice. You saw my life as nothing more than a scrap yard you could pave over to fix his failures." Orson stood frozen. He looked like he had aged 2 decades in the span of 10 minutes. His shoulders were hunched, the authoritative fire in his eyes entirely extinguished. He was a hollowed-out shell of a patriarch. I walked over to Declan, who was still leaning against the anvil, weeping uncontrollably. I looked down at him with zero pity. "You did not just bet against a company, Declan," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet shop. "You bet against me. You have been betting against me your whole life. You told me I was just a hammer swinger. You told me not to dream too big or I would get hurt. Well, business is business, little bro. I cannot save reckless gamblers from their own stupidity." I turned back to Orson. "You taught him this. You taught him that what I do has no value. You taught him that I was less than him because my hands get dirty. This is your failure as much as it is his. You bet everything on the wrong son." I walked over to the large steel doors and pulled them wide open. The bright morning sunlight spilled into the dusty shop, illuminating the pathetic state of the family I was leaving behind. "Get out," I commanded, pointing toward the driveway. "Get out of my shop. Get out of my life. If you ever step foot on this property again, Rosalind will have you arrested for trespassing." Beatrix wailed, trying to reach for me again, but Orson finally moved. He grabbed her arm, pulling her up from the dirt. He did not say a word to me. He could not. His pride was shattered beyond repair. He practically dragged my weeping mother out the door. Declan stumbled after them, wiping his nose on the sleeve of his ruined designer suit. He did not look back. As the 3 of them piled into Orson's car and drove slowly down the gravel path, I felt a massive, profound weight lift off my chest. The toxic fog that had suffocated me for decades was gone. The battlefield was silent, save for the crackle of the forge. We had won. The aftermath of that morning was a media spectacle. By the next day, the financial news networks were having a field day with the collapse of Declan's hedge fund. The headlines were brutal, dissecting his reckless short position and his spectacular downfall. The SEC officially opened an investigation into his practices. To avoid prison time, Declan had to liquidate everything he owned. His luxury cars, his watches, his penthouse, all gone. Vesper, true to her nature, filed for divorce the moment the bank accounts were frozen. She took whatever jewelry she had left and vanished, leaving Declan to face the music alone. As for Orson and Beatrix, the bank foreclosed on their massive estate a month later. With their retirement funds wiped out, they had nowhere to go. Aunt Theodora, the very woman who had called me screaming about family loyalty, ended up renting them a tiny, run-down 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. I heard through the grapevine that Orson had to take a job as a greeter at a hardware store just to pay for groceries. The irony was undeniable. Genevieve and I never looked back. Aegis Corps continued to soar. The partnership with Rosalind's firm expanded our operations globally. We built a new, state-of-the-art research facility, but Genevieve still kept her original basement lab under my shop. My own business exploded. With the backing of Aegis Corps, I expanded the forge, hiring a crew of young, passionate metalworkers. I became the exclusive architectural fabricator for all of their green infrastructure projects. My gates, my sculptures, and my structural designs are now featured in city centers across the country. Sometimes late at night, when the forge is quiet and the embers are glowing soft and red, I think about that day. I think about how desperate my family was to tear me down, all because I chose a different path. I learned a profound lesson about true value. Value is not measured by the label on your suit, the size of your bank account, or the approval of people who only love you when you are useful to them. True value is built with your own hands. It is forged in the fires of hard work, integrity, and the love of a partner who stands by you when the world tries to crush you. My brother thought he was building an empire on paper, but a strong wind blew it all away. Genevieve and I built our empire on steel and dirt, and no market crash can ever tear that down. Many people have told me that I was too harsh. They say that leaving my elderly parents to face poverty and eviction was a cruel thing to do, regardless of how they treated me. Family relatives still send me angry messages, calling me a monster for turning my back on my own blood when they had nothing left. What do you think? Did I go too far by shutting the door on them when they begged for their home? Should I have used our wealth to save them from the streets, or did they get exactly what they deserved? I would love to hear your thoughts, so please drop your opinions down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and felt the satisfaction of seeing arrogant people get a harsh dose of reality, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next drama. Thank you for listening, and remember to always stand your ground.